Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my January wrap-up. If you can't tell, I am fighting off a cold for the third time in 3 months. So I am very distressed. I would like to speak to a manager. I don't know why this is happening to me. I'm eating so healthy. I am drinking so much water. I am probably the healthiest I've been in my whole life, and I keep getting sick. So this January wrap-up is going to be a quick one because I just want to return to my essential oil diffuser and my Dayquil and my Indian food and read and just be an incubus of the bubonic plague. So my reading month for 2018 started out pretty strong in my opinion. I was able to read 8 books, which is my usual before grad school reading amount, typically speaking. So that was very exciting, but it was mostly because of the school holiday and stuff that allowed me to, you know, do fun things. But it's a good way to start off the year. So the first book that I read in 2018 was Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So I am rereading the series. I've only ever read the series through one time. I've only ever read the books through once. So last year I started reading Harry Potter again, and I only got through the one book, and then this year I read this one. So I might read a book a year with Harry Potter, who knows, but we'll see. But this was really fun for me because, like I said, I've only ever read these books through once. I read this for the first time back in like 4th or 5th grade, so I don't remember a lot of it, and a lot of my memories of the Harry Potter series are from the movies, which, as we all know, leave a lot of things out or change some things or whatever. So if you would have asked me before rereading this book which book was one of my favorites from the Harry Potter series, I would not have said the Chamber of Secrets, but now it is. I really liked this. This was 5 out of 5 stars for me. Not because of nostalgia, because like I said, I forgot so much of it, but because, especially knowing how the series goes, there's so much that's linked back to the Chamber of Secrets in the later part of the series, as we know. Like, Deathly Hallows and Chamber of Secrets are like so highly linked. So that was really fun to look back and get to see all the connections that were made and just how sweet these characters are. Like, I forget how much of a sweet bean Harry is, and I got to see more, obviously, of Ginny, who I had like forgotten about, because, you know, book Ginny and movie Ginny is just like completely different, and just like all of that is really fun. So I'm looking forward to rereading the series, as I always am. It's just a series that I forget that I'm rereading because I'm like, oh yeah, Harry Potter. So I'll probably read like a book or 2 a year, and I'll take forever to reread this series, but 5 out of 5 stars. Then I listened to American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I've already done a full review on this book, so you can check that out. I will link it on the screen. But this is a standalone adult fantasy story that is basically, as the title says, it's about American gods. So it follows our main character of Shadow, and he gets recruited by some gods to work for them, and everything kind of unfolds from there. This is such an interesting book, and it's one that people are either gonna love or hate. If you like a lot of the pantheons and mythology, and I mean this covers like all of them, so many, then you'll probably like this. If you're okay with meandering stories, you'll probably like this. But this is, like I said, very meandering. Sometimes you're like, what is the point? It takes a lot of time to get to the point, but in the end, a lot of things do wrap up really nicely, and I just like seeing all of the gods. I think there is some problems with like the female characters in here, especially. Neil Gaiman did a really good job with female characters in his other books, so I think he just gets better about writing female characters, but in this book, I feel like they weren't as strong as they were in other books, so it's a fairly male-dominated story, but I love me some gods of all kinds. I'm talking about gods and how gods fit into American culture and gods from other, like, all of that I really like. I listened to this one on audiobook, and I really highly recommend the full cast audiobook, so that was a lot of fun. And as of last night, I did start watching the Stars series, only the first episode, and I know some people, you guys have already told me either you love the series and hated the book, or you hated the series and loved the book, or you haven't read the book but you love this. Everybody has an opinion. Obviously. This is a very polarizing read, I think a very polarizing story, but so far, I thought that the series is a very true adaptation so far. At least within the first episode, and the stuff they're expanding on is stuff that needs to be expanded on, so that's a fun time. I'm going to continue with that, and I do plan on doing all over series review of the series in comparison to the book and all of that stuff. So it's a fun thing to watch, but I do think you probably are going to get more out of the series if you've read the book, because I've definitely felt that way. Anyway, I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read Shadow Song by S.J. Jones. This is the second book in the Winter Song duology, so this is a Labyrinth retelling, sort of, very loosely based on Labyrinth the movie, and this was a huge disappointment for me. I've already done a full review on this, so I'll link that on the screen, but this didn't have any of the elements that I liked about the first book. The first book for me was about a 3-star read. I thought it had some potential for the second book, so I was interested enough in the second book, but all of that was a huge letdown for me. There was just a lot of being in the main character's head and not a lot of any of the things that were sort of promised with the first book. It is mostly a romance, like a fantasy romance, you know, with the Goblin King and the main character, and you get almost none of that in this second book, and there's so many things with so much potential that are just a letdown and underutilized and underdeveloped, and it's just so unsatisfying. But I go into that in further detail in my review, but I gave this one 1.5 out of 5 stars, and the 0.5 is just for some of the cool world building elements you do get. Then I read The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the last book in the Broken Earth trilogy, and I can't talk much about the plot, obviously, but I loved it. I've done full reviews for every single book in this series, and I have the review for this one coming up very soon, so look forward to that. But this was a beautiful conclusion, as I knew that it would be. It had a lot of themes of parenthood and motherhood especially, which just really tugged at my heartstrings, and this series is a post-apocalyptic fantasy series, so the apocalypse is currently happening as you're watching it, and it's very focused on female characters, and the majority are female characters, and all of the characters for the most part are people of color, so it's just so fascinating. It talks about oppression and this different kind of magic that's involved with like earth magic, and it's just so unique. And this one almost has elements of being like genre bending because it's fantasy, but it almost has some sci-fi elements in that it's a fantasy world, and that fantasy world has its own kind of science fiction. You get what I'm saying? So it's not our kind of science fiction, it's fantasy science fiction. Yeah, it's a little weird and I love it. This was a very powerful conclusion, and what I knew N.K. Jemisin was going to do, she tore out my heart, and I just let her. So now I'm going to continue to read everything that N.K. Jemisin puts out. I'm going back and reading some of her backlist, so I plan on reading the Dreamblood duology next, and I highly enjoyed this and recommend this to everybody. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Then I listened to Blue Lily, Lily Blue on audiobook. This is the 3rd book in the Raven cycle. I forget what they actually call the series, but this is a series that I wasn't really planning on continuing. Like, I was kind of okay with the Dream Thieves, and I was like, I don't know if I want to continue with the series. I know it's very well loved, but I don't know. But then this was available instantly for audiobook download from my library, so I was like, why not? And I loved this audiobook. It was so atmospheric and so well done in that I was not sure if you're going to get the atmosphere that you do when you read the books, but definitely I felt like the audiobook narrator did an excellent job, and it pulled me back into the story. The second book kind of goes on a little offshoot and focuses more on one of the other characters, and doesn't really focus on the main plot line, so I was a little like, oh, I can just stop now after that book, but I'm glad I continued with it. So this had me hooked. I was taking a lot of walks and listening to the audiobook. I was staying in my car longer to continue with the audiobook. There's a lot of elements now that I'm like intrigued by, and the story is picking up, and we're getting to the end and stuff. I'm having feelings about the Blue and Gansey stuff, which I didn't know if I was going to or not. And here we are with them being a little angsty and wonderful, and so I'm having emotions, and I highly enjoyed this. So I'm looking forward to the conclusion. This is a series that I don't really know anything about the conclusion. I haven't been spoiled for, so I'm actually even hesitant to like comment about it in a wrap-up, because people have a tendency to make comments that they don't think are spoilers, but they are, because they're hinting at certain things. So just don't even mention this series to me in the comments. Please don't. I don't want to hear your thoughts or anything about it in the comments. Let me just finish the series in peace, and then we can talk about it a lot, because I do plan on doing like a full series review for this, because I know a lot of people really love it, but right now, just let me enjoy it at my pace. But I definitely enjoyed this one. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Looking forward to the conclusion. I then read Wild Beauty by Anna Marie McLemore, and this is a magical realism story. It's a standalone YA magical realism, and it takes place in a smaller town where all of the girls in this one family have the ability to make flowers and stuff grow from the earth, and they kind of turn this town into like a beautiful garden. But there is a rumored curse upon their family that any person that they fall in love with will then disappear or vanish. So all of these girls in this family kind of live in fear of that and with the knowledge of that, and they happen to all be in love with the same girl, and so they're kind of trying to change that fate. And in the midst of all of that, there's also an appearance of this strange boy, and everything kind of goes from there. So this one was very surprising, because it didn't quite feel the same level of magical realism that like When the Moon Was Ours did, which is another book that I read by her very recently. So this isn't quite as flowery, so I think if you're hesitant to get into magical realism, then you might enjoy this one a bit more, because I don't find it to be as flowery of writing, as highly magical realism as like When the Moon Was Ours was. But I always struggle to be able to like review or give a star rating to magical realism books. And I finally come to realize that because I love them, but because of the nature of what they are, this like magical realism element of them, I almost feel like sometimes the plot gets lost, but it's kind of supposed to get lost, and like it almost feels, it has like a dreamy feel to it, so I almost find myself forgetting a lot about it after I read them because they have this dreamlike quality. So it's very hard for me to review some of these books because they just are like a feeling and they're very like hard to kind of quantify. So I ended up really enjoying this. I liked a lot of the messages with it. I liked that a lot of the characters in here are representative of different sexualities, a lot of bisexual women or lesbians or queer women. There's a lot of, it's mostly female characters in here, but that is discussed a lot as far as there's these generations of women, grandmothers, mothers, and then the daughters who are like the main focus, but they're all living in the same town really close to one another. And so there's a lot of discussion of like their past loves and their current loves and all this kind of thing. So that was a lot of fun. And just like the beauty of like the flowers and all of that. But again, I find this book and just like magic realism stories in general very hard to hold on to. And I just find myself like losing pieces of them. They don't stick with me as much. So I end up giving this one 3 to 3.5 stars. But it's magical realism. So like if you like magical realism, you're gonna like this. They're hard to review. I just keep saying that because I've finally come to that realization why I always struggle with reviewing these books that I can speak so emotionally about, but it's more of a feeling than anything about the plot. You might understand this if you're also a magical realism fan. I then listened to another audiobook, and that was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Now I know that I'm way behind the party on this, and that this was a really big book in like 2014 and 2015 when it first came out, but this is a post-apocalyptic sort of science fiction-y story because it takes place in like the North America, like what used to be Canada and the United States, and it's following a giant mass pandemic plague that knocked out 99.9% of the world's population. And it follows for the most part a Shakespearean company that is going around and doing Shakespearean plays. So it's kind of like the discussion of how art survives post mass destruction. And this was so good. And everyone's already said how good it is, so I don't really need to go into how good it is, but I do plan on doing a review about it because I want to talk about how good it is. But I loved this audiobook. It was so well done. And the thing is that everyone said that if you're going into it as like a post-apocalyptic story, it's not quite the focus on the post-apocalyptic part. It's the focus on like people surviving after and how this apocalypse changed everybody, and it's not so much the action that you think of with like a post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic story. You also get a lot of flashbacks, which flashbacks can really make or break a story, and I feel like in this it really made the story. You get a lot of flashbacks to what's happening before the plague struck and like as the plague striking, but not like the actiony stuff again. It's a lot of just like the normal people, everyday life, and what happens with that. And those moments were some of my favorites, and they connect to the like present day post-plague stuff. And they made me so emotional. There's so many characters that I was so connected to, and you sort of know the outcome and all of this, so it's just like, it just made me, it was just like a quiet sort of story. In a lot of ways it felt like a quiet kind of day in the life type story, and I really enjoyed that. It has like more like literary fiction feel. This is one of those, again, kind of genre benders, but it sort of like follows this same group of people, and it was just, oh, it was so good. I'm going to be doing a full review on this. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read this month was Traitors Blade by Sebastian de Castel. This is the first book in the Greatcoat series, which is an adult fantasy series, and it follows Falcio, who is the first cantor of the Greatcoats. The Greatcoats are a disgraced group of kind of soldiers, magisters, bringers of justice in this world, where they were the people of the king. The king was in charge of them, and the king was apparently a pretty good person, but this world is full of very corrupt dukes, and they wanted to overthrow the king, so years ago they did just that, and now the Greatcoats are just scattered around the country. And you're following one of the generals of the Greatcoats after all this has happened, and he actually is on kind of a mission, and he's with some other 2 Greatcoats, and they're going around this world kind of trying to just stay one step ahead, kind of get the Greatcoats to a place where they are not looked down upon so much and disgraced and hated. And they also have a couple of other missions kind of in the background. And this is a really good foundational book, but there's so much that is not explained yet, because I think this is like a 5-book series. I think it's now completed, but it's a 5 or 6 book series. And this is just really an introduction to the world. I liked a lot of this. I liked Falcio as our main character, and I liked the banter that he has between him and his friends, especially. They also have really fun fight scenes, but I do feel like sometimes the fight scenes are a little bit, they're too much. Like there's so many fight scenes and there's really vivid descriptions of the fight scenes, but it's just like, I don't really care that much about what exactly you're doing with your like hand maneuvers to block these things, but it shows how skilled of fighters they are. And there's just a lot of like witty banter. So I feel like if you like Mistborn or like the Lies of Locke Lamora and like the relationships in there, I think you'll really like this. That is kind of what it felt like to me. It's sort of like the Three Musketeers in a way, and it's a lot of fun. Falcio is definitely like a almost like lawful good type character, so at times you're just like, Falcio, it's like, stop. But also I just really love him. The part that I didn't really like is that I feel like the villains in here, like these dukes and these like politically bad people, are just mustache twirling villains, and they're all just bad but with no real reason besides like they're dukes so they're bad, and they're like corrupt so they're bad, and you're like, can you give me like a little better of a reason? Like I need a little more dimension to these characters, but I have heard that this gets better throughout the series, and this is always a series that I plan on continuing, so I'm definitely looking forward to that. It was definitely fast-paced and fun, and it's a fantasy world that I'm looking forward to getting even more into. There's definitely like magic and intrigue and politics and all of that, and this was a good foundation, but so much is unanswered. Obviously, it's the first book in the series, but I feel like even more is unanswered than in some other series, so I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to get better with each book, but I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. So that is it for the books I read in January. Comment them below and let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them, except for the Raven Boys books, because like I said, I don't want to hear anything. I just want to read that series in peace. I know you guys have a lot of emotions, but just wait until I'm done and then we can have emotions together. Nothing. But everything else you can talk to me about. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all guys soon. Bye!